Jayant Patel is now serving a 7-year sentence. For some patients and their families, that was only a small payment for their loss. But it is a landmark case. I spoke to Associate Law Professor Heather Douglas and the Australian Medical Association's Steve Hambleton about the implications for the legal and medical professions. Dr. Heather Douglas and Dr. Steve Hambleton, thanks for joining Stateline. Heather Douglas, could I start with you? An extraordinary set of events this week. From a point of law perspective, what makes this case so unique?
The interesting thing in this case is the interpretation that the judge in the trial gave to Section 288 of the Criminal Code. We've all operated on the basis that 288 applied to the act of the doctor, so the operation that the doctor carried out. But the way that it's been interpreted in this particular case is that it might incorporate the decision-making and the considerations that went into deciding to actually carry out the act. So it takes into account these initial considerations as to whether he should have done the operations at all.
So what sort of precedent does it create?
Well, potentially it means that doctors could be criminally liable for more than just the operation. They could be criminally liable for the way they make decisions about what operations to carry out. So it does broaden, potentially, their criminal liability. But obviously there's an appeal coming up, so we'll have to see whether that interpretation of Section 288 stays the way that Justice Byrne has directed the jury to take it into account.
Dr. Hambleton, doctors must have been watching this case with interest and perhaps a little nervously as well. Is there a chance that surgeons will now really consider the legal risks too great when they're weighing up operations?
Look, I really don't think so. I think this case really steps outside of normal medical boundaries, and really I guess there are many opportunities for this to be stopped along the way. But I think for surgeons who are operating within their medical training, I think that their decisions they'll stick with their decisions. I don't think they'll change their actions very much.
So what are the implications of this case then for the medical fraternity?
Well, look, it's a great concern to us that some of the negative publicity for this international medical graduate may actually sort of pass on to existing doctors who are working in this country. We've got to make sure that the public understand that the medical boards have lifted their game, if you like, and the systems are much better than they were then. And we can be rest assured that those doctors who are working in this country actually all reach the same standard.
What about rising insurance costs? Is that a possibility?
Well, I think there's a whole lot of bridges to be crossed before we get to that point. I think, once again, this case is really outside of the bounds of normal behaviour. So I just think we have to wait a little longer before we think we see any changes in insurance costs or indemnity issues for doctors.
Heather Douglas, this has already been a long-running saga. This case is headed for an appeal. How long could that take?
It should be resolved relatively quickly, especially if Dr. Patel's in custody. I would imagine that there would be an attempt to make it certainly sorted out within the next 6 months, because obviously if on appeal it's decided that the conviction shouldn't stand, nobody will want him being in custody for something that he's not ultimately going to be convicted for. I mean, I should also emphasise that this is an exceptional case, and medical negligence prosecutions in the criminal sphere are exceptional. They happen very, very rarely. So I think the implications, although there are implications, they will affect very few people overall. What will be very interesting, though, is what comes out of the appeal and whether, as a result of what comes out of the appeal, has any effect on the legislation, because I think it's already been flagged by the Premier that there may need to be legislative changes to the criminal code. So as the doctor said, we'll need to wait to see what happens as a result of this appeal to really work out how it changes the legal landscape.
And in terms of waiting, you mentioned 6 months for an appeal. That might seem like a long time for the victims, but is that a usual length of time?
It's not an unusual length of time, and I think it should be sorted out before that. Of course, everybody will need some time to prepare the arguments. It's an important issue. It may not stop also at the Court of Appeal in Queensland. This is a matter that may actually go to the High Court. But I guess Dr. Patel, if that happens, will be hoping that he has bail to prepare for that one.
And just finally, Dr. Hambleton, the Patel saga exposed big problems in Queensland Health, and there's been a lot of discussion about whether things have changed. Can there be a guarantee that we'll never see a repeat of a Patel?
Well, I guess we can never give a guarantee, but we can certainly say that the Australian Medical Board and through the Queensland Medical Board has definitely learnt from this case. Systems are improved. The system failed the people of Bundaberg, and it failed the doctor because it shouldn't have happened. And so they have lifted the standards. You know, every single doctor who works in this country now has their credentials checked. They have to have certificates of good standing from every jurisdiction they've worked in. And they're better supervised when they come here. And as I say, they need to reach the Australian standard to be able to practice independently in this country.
Okay, Dr. Steve Hambleton from the AMA and Dr. Heather Douglas from the University of Queensland, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much.